Hi everyone, Zach here, and welcome to the 40th lesson of this RTS tutorial series. The lesson portion of this will be relatively short, and which will upgrade to 4.22. I realize as the day this video releases that 4.22.3 has been released, and I recorded this when 4.22.2 was out. There is no major difference in how this is going to affect how things work. I've already checked it on 4.22.3 and everything is fine. Because that is relatively short, the upgrade sort of stuff we have to do, I decided that we're going to go over a review of what we've done in this section of the series. This is the final video for this section. And the next section we'll do a lot of cleanup, we'll fix some bugs, and then in the section after, we'll combine harvesting resources with buildings. We'll get units spawning in from constructing them in buildings. We'll also do advanced resource development using, again, our buildings. So that said, don't fire up your editor. Just open your Epic Launcher, and let's get started. Hi guys, so here we are inside of our Epic Launcher. What I want you to do is, if you don't have 4.22 installed and you want to update to 4.22, click here, add a new engine in, make sure it's 4.22. Once you have that in, hit launch and you'll get this window. And I've already searched for the files I want. As you can see, I have several of these files. This is one of the earlier recording attempts that I decided not to run with. This is the prep file I used to record from, and in fact, I've already updated this one to 4.22. You just can't see it here because I have a different name for it. This is the file I actually use for the recordings. That's the original prep file that got corrupted. So, as you can tell, my default is 4.21. The original project's in 4.21. Now, before you upgrade, you should make a duplicate of that. Fortunately, when I go to open this now, it's going to tell me, hey, I'm not working with the correct engine. Do you want to make a copy and upgrade that copy? And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to select this so we can open a copy. That's what we're going to do. So we're opening a copy of the project. So it's going to create it. All right. So it's fired it up. I don't have my content menu. There we go. First thing I'm going to do is, well, I'm just going to hit play. If there's anything wrong with our blueprint, it's going to send me a warning message. So probably want to send it here first to begin with. Now, I knew there wasn't going to be a warning message because I've already tested this out, as I've mentioned. So the next thing I want to do, because, you know, why else are we spending 2 minutes on a tutorial, is I'm going to double check the main file. So I'm going to go to my blueprints. First one I really care about is the player. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to check the player controller. I'm just going to also pin that up there. And, well, as you can see, there are no warning messages anywhere, nothing highlighted. So it looks like nothing we have in here is going to be removed in later editions. I'm going to open up a few of the macros. I cannot wait till we clean this up in the next section because this is pretty tangled. That's the word I'm going to use, tangled. Also, we're going to get rid of these at some point when we have those spawn in by building them. All right, so just want to make sure nothing is off in here because this is one of the trickier bits. It doesn't look so. All right. Okay. So that's actually the building master. I should have checked what I was clicking on. Return resources is part of this one. That's a very simple one. There shouldn't be anything off in there. So this one looks fine. The next one that I really care about in terms of making sure it's squared away is going to be our game state. Just going to go into here, double check everything. Make sure our reference casts are actually still good. Why wouldn't they be, but still paranoid. And so again, we're seeing no warnings. Sometimes you will see little warnings on, a particular node saying this node is no longer going to be used. And what it's doing, it's telling you what's going to be changed, what you're going to need to update. So this is a relatively brief tutorial. So instead of just ending here at 4 minutes into this part of the recording and going through all these checks, assuming you follow the tutorial as I have it, there should be no issues. Let's just talk about some of the things we've done in this section, and in particular, what we've done with regards to our construction. So that's what the section's about. So I haven't been doing these overviews at the end of the sections, and I figured we should do it now, I guess. So let's go into here. The main thing we have to think about is we have this building master. This building master sets everything up for every building we make. So the structure that's in here, everything that's in this, from our components list to our functions and our variables, so far gets passed down to its children and its children's children, and so forth. So we have a billboard just as a marker. We have an empty mesh that will be replaced by the building we're putting in there. And we have a collision point that surrounds the entire building called entry point. So these two are the main components that we care about. So when we construct the building, so the second the building is put onto the map, we get a building mesh and a display mesh, so that we actually, have something on the screen. So this is the mesh we get in. This is where it's going. So the building mesh, the display mesh is the mesh that we are using, and where we're using it is on this this building mesh. This gets set onto that. We then set our entry point based on the size of what we've now put in this building mesh. So we get the size of that, and we set that to the box extent. Now, if you remember, you just click this, it is going to be 25% bigger. We then check, and this is something we can set in the editor. So we drag a building in. Let me just grab one. So we drag the factory in. The default is this is false, so it's going to make the ghost mesh, the preview mesh. If we hit is built, we get the built mesh. Let me just delete that now. So this checks, is the building set to built or not? If it is set to built, we get the basic white wall. If it's not, we get the preview mesh. In our event graph, our main event graph, we make our reference cast as usual. So we get a reference to our game state, so we can get our game time. We make a reference to our player controller, so we can get information about the units we're sending to it. And we create our widget, our user interface for the building. Let me just clear out everything that we're eventually going to open back up and talk about. We then bind to our game speed control inside our game state. So remember, in our second section inside our game state, we have this event dispatcher that whenever game speed is updated, it sends this information here. So we have that down here. So this says bind this custom event here, or this custom function here, to this function from this function in the game state blueprint. We then update our game speed from that. We set it as well. We bind our player controller to our event HUD button. So if you remember our player controller, we have something very similar to this, where if we click a building, it will pop up the HUD. We automatically have that bypass off of this one, though. So if we scroll down here and take a look at it, we just ignore the bypass because we don't make buildings invisible. So we update our game speed. When we put a new building in, we set an event off called onSpawn, which sets us to under construction. And our event tick gets our delta time every tick. It then checks, one, is the building set to under construction? So if we just spawned it in, then it's going to be. And we check if it's not built. And we check, are there occupants in it? If all these conditions are met, there are people inside the building is not built, and it's set to under construction, then we start constructing the building. How we construct the building is we use the same setup we did for our game clock. We check what we get our delta time in. That's why we took it outside here in the main event graph. We get our game clock, which is what we're going to update. So this is initialized to 0. Sorry, I said that weirdly. This is initialized to 0. We also get our game speed, which we then divide by the number of people inside the building. The smaller this number, the faster this will increase. We then multiply this by our construction modifier, which we've set to 1. But again, this is just showing you how you can add like a bonus feature, and we're like, for 20 minutes, you get a ×2 speed. So you can make this ×2. We'd multiply it by 60 to convert this time into hours, which will represent game hours, by the way. So remember, everything in here is working the same as our game clock in general is. So by multiplying by 60, this will represent hours in game. We then set that to time worked. At the end of that, we check, is the time we've worked equal to or greater than the amount of time required to construct the building? This is just something we set inside our variables. So we go in here, we have that in there. There it is. And if it is, we set the building to is built, which automatically stops this from happening because this statement is no longer valid. We will set that to false, which also then means that statement's no longer valid. We'll release all the occupants, which also means this statement is no longer valid. It's a false. All 3 statements are now false. We'll clear the occupant list from the HUD, and we'll set the material to the basic white wall. Now, this is the same for displaying the HUD. It's the same setup as we had in the units. So all we're doing is we're checking that the building we've clicked on is this actual actor. Remember, this blueprint gets created for every single building on the map. We add it to the screen. We set the inputs. We make sure the original main UI is still active. And we'll get into this entry point in a second. So all of that information gets passed on to the children. So whenever we put a building in here, we are going, hey, this information is needed by those buildings. Let's go take a look at that entry point stuff for a second now. And I'm doing that from the player controller. Actually, we're going to step back. We're going to talk about construction for a moment longer. So let's just take a look at our spawning in our preview. So when we click on our HUD, actually let's open up our HUD as well so you can see what I'm talking about. Wrong HUD. I gotta stop saying HUD because these are UIs or UMGs. So in our main game UI, we have these 4 buttons here. We're going to ignore delete for a moment. That are factory, training post, barracks, silo. When we click them, it takes the information of what sort of building we've pressed on, and it sends that to the construction preview reference. And it picks from a class that we set in that reference. So it's using an interface. So we get the buildings that are of the building master class, and we have a whole bunch. We have the, let's see, we have the military buildings master. Well, we're not ever going to send that. We're actually going to send the training post when we want to send something like that. So let me pin that up there as well. So it sends that information over. Let's go to the building preview. Boom. So if we look here, sorry, I lied. If we look here, we have this construct building. It goes to the interface. The interface sends it over to the preview. So let's find construct building in here. So we have this event construct building. It spawns in an actor. Now this is a temporary actor that we're going to destroy right away. It is blank. All it's doing is it's there so we can get information from it. And the information we want to get is the display mesh, the construction time, the building name, and the cost to make the building. We pass that information on, which we'll deal with in a second. That's the only reason why we get this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cast from this class to the building master. We are going to destroy the building, this little preview we've made. And we're going to send this information along with the class that we're building to the spawn preview. So in the spawn preview, we check, are we currently previewing? If we are, then we delete the old preview, and then we make the new one. If we aren't already previewing, we just make this new one. And in this new one, we pass this building class. This is the most important part, this building class. This is what we are previewing. And then, actually, sorry, this and the display mesh are the most important parts. This is what we're previewing. This is what it should look like. Everything else is just extra stuff you can have in. I think it's important for an RTS game, but these two are the most important. Without these two, you wouldn't be able to see anything. So they get passed in. We set we are previewing. We then pass this information on to set preview mode active in the player controller. We now set the mesh to the display mesh, and we open a gate down here. And on this gate, what we're doing is every tick, we are setting the location based on our grid snaps, which we can change. So, you can set this to various amounts by changing these numbers here. So this is how much the building is going to move along the screen as you move your mouse. We check if they're overlapping. If it is overlapping, then we set it to a red preview mesh. If it's not overlapping, we need that sort of gray, white, ghostly blue. Now, this is happening while the open gate is active. That close gate comes from a few places. So it comes from when we destroy the preview, and we trigger this in the player controller. So let's go back to the player controller for a minute. So in the player controller, this has now become activated. So we're going down this path. We are checking overlap still because we need this mostly to see if you should reduce resources when we actually left click. So remember, the entire time we're moving the mouse, the building is following the mouse at this point. That's part of that open gate, how much it's following that mouse. Once we click down to place the building, we check, are we overlapping when we click? If we're not, we check, do we have enough resources? If we do, we remove the resources. We set the construction structure. So that takes us back to the building preview. So it's this function here. And all that's doing is taking that information from earlier plus where we have the building at, where it's at near our mouse, and passing that on into a structure. We're passing that structure out, and that structure then gets carried elsewhere. We'll come to that in a second. Let's just continue with this line of thought. Actually, when I say in a second, I mean literally when we come back into the next graph. So back in the player controller, that structure is passed on to start construction, which is in our construction manager, which then is literally, I'm removing this breakpoint while I do this, taking all that information and setting it. We set our construction time as well, which is then used in that event tick. So we take the construction time, which is hours, but it doesn't work as hours until we multiply it by 60, just like we did with the build time earlier, or the work time. And then it passes that on, and if you go back to our main graph in the building master, this now has value, so it can check if our work time is greater than our construction time. And then we tell it to destroy the preview, which closes this gate down here. It empties out our building and display mesh, which are the two most important parts. So if these are empty, we can put other things in there. We turn is previewing off, which then sends information to player controller to turn build mode active off. We then empty out our static meshes because these are now empty. And then we set our rotation back to 0. And the reason why we set our rotation back to 0 is if we go back to our player controller for a second here, we have, let me see if I can find where they are. This is another reason why we need to clean this up because this is, there we are, these two right here. We can rotate the buildings left and right. So we need to set those rotations back to 0. Now I was going to say, this is the other reason why we need to clean this up. This is very poorly laid out. I'm having a hard time finding my own stuff in here. So we are going to clean that up later on. Now, when we want to build the building, the other part we need is to have units there outside of having enough resources. So for that to work, let's take a look at our player graph again. And we're going to assume we have units selected. I'm not going to walk through the marquee selection. I've done that twice now in this series, I believe. So we check, it's not left click, it's right click. We check, are we in delete mode? No. We check, is building mode active? No. We then check, do we have units selected? If so, We then check, have we sent them to a building? So that happens in here. We check, is the target building there? Yes, no. If it isn't, if it is, clear it out. If it isn't, continue on anyway. We continue on either way. We stop movement. We check, are they going to a vehicle? No. Are they going to a building? Yes. We then cast to this building, so we have a reference to it. And then we move to the building. So let's take a look at that in the event graph. So we get target building, which just sets which building is the unit moving to inside the selected units. So all that does is go into the units and sets this target building so that they know which building their target is. So back in our player controller then, we move to location or actor, which is we are moving to that target location, which is the building. What happens then is, back in our building master, oh, this is our preview, sorry about that. Back in our building master, we have that entry point collision check. And when a unit crosses over it, or when something crosses over it, it checks, is it a unit? If it is, the cast will work. If it isn't, the cast will fail. And if the unit has a target building that's the same as this particular BP, then, so this instance of the BP, remember again, every building will have their own version of this BP. So this cell can refer to building 1 in building 1's BP. In building 2, it will have a different self. So it knows that these can be the same, or they can be different buildings, so it won't work. So it's going to check, is this the right building? If so, then we're going to activate this event called arrive at building, which is in our unit master, which gets rid of our selection icon. It gets rid of our is selected. It sets the unit to hidden. We then set actor hidden into game, and it updates the occupant list for the building, which is this nice array of stuff for the building HUD that I've gone over a couple of times in previous videos. So that covers all the main stuff for what we've done in this section. I know this has been one of the longer sections. Now that we have all the base parts of our game set up, now that we have, units we can move around, units that we can take a look at the profile of, I can actually click on the right thing. There we go. Sorry, it took me a second to do that. But now we can spawn buildings in, and it costs us resources to do so. We have a few things we need to do. One, we need to clean up some of the things in here. We need to clean up some issues where I've just selected some units. They are now moving that way. Those 2 units I sent to that building are now there. If I hit release, they're going to show up there. So we need to fix that. If we put a vehicle, that's the wrong thing. If we put a vehicle in, let's just move them farther away so you can see this happen. I'm going to make them appear in that and disappear about the time they hit this orb. Oh, well, they did it already for me. So we have that issue we need to clean up. If I wait another 5 minutes, I will not be able to respawn those units from the vehicle. So we need to clean that up as well. And as you've heard me complain about the blueprints, we need to clean those up. Once we've done all of that, once we've gotten all those little bits and bobs nice and tidy, what we're going to do is we are going to then take care of, also we're going to update this so we can actually see which units are in the vehicle, just like we can when we put units into a building. I love how the car thinks it can get in there. It can't. We'll then take care of harvesting resources. We'll take care of bringing the resources to the building. We'll take care of the silo, actually updating the amount of maximum resources a unit can have. We'll set our maximum resources to have meaning so that we tie all the little bits and bobs we have together. So, also one of the cleanup things we'll have to take care of is the birth date issue I keep referencing that I haven't taken care of. So outside of all of that, if there's anything in this series before we get into the more advanced AI stuff and before we get into taking care of, our enemy units, I'm not sure what's going on with my screen that it's doing that. Please let me know down in the comments below. It should not be doing that. What the heck? And I will endeavor to do what I can to include it. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this series. I am really horrified that it's moving backwards like that. I'm not sure why it's doing that. And if you have, go ahead and hit that like button down below and that subscribe button and notification bell so you know when the next video is out. I do plan on doing other videos outside the RTS, looking at other Hellblade mechanics. If you want to see me do mechanics from other games that you're interested about, please let me know. If a mechanic is too animation heavy, I will probably have to say no, just because I'm not an animator, unless you know a free source of the animations that I can use and that other people can use as well. And, as always, I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.